right, I'm going to try this video again without the dog making too much of a hassle. So, when it comes to chapter 5 of the On Cooking, we are looking at small equipment that's commonly used in the restaurant industry. So, a strainer or a sieve. These are used to take a liquid from solid, and there's a bunch of different ones, and they kind of have specific functions. So the first one here is a colander. So a colander is a bowl with holes, and some of my students refer to this as the spaghetti strainer because it's often used to pour the water off of noodles or pastas or potatoes. So a colander is a bowl with holes. It does typically have feet on it, so it would stand on its own. A mesh strainer, on the other hand, often has, sometimes it can have feet or a bottom. This can also be used for the same purpose of draining off pasta or potatoes, but you might lose some of your product in the mesh part, and sometimes it has a handle. I use this when I'm rinsing fruits and vegetables. I use these pretty often because I do wash a lot of fruits and vegetables. I have lots and lots of mesh strainers of various sizes around. I do a lot of broccoli at home, so I drain broccoli and let broccoli steam off. A temi or a drum sieve is often used sometimes with dry ingredients. You can use this to sift your ingredients. You can also push food products through this, and it will actually kind of puree and then remove things like seeds. So if I were doing, say, a raspberry sauce, I might cook down my raspberries and my sauce and then pour it through the tami and kind of push it through and then separate that really fine liquid. A lot of times, a drum sieve or a tami is a very, very fine mesh. There are two types of conical cylinder strainers. The first one here is a chinois. So a chinois generally has a handle. It would fit over such as a large stock pot or a large, like a large tall cylinder. The chinois has a fine mesh strainer. The china cap, on the other hand, usually has a perforated metal. So the chinois is usually mesh, and the china cap is usually metal. The holes are kind of larger. I have heard these two actually in a kitchen be used interchangeably, particularly the term chinois used pretty often to describe both of them, but that is the difference between them. With all of these products, you may also want to use some cheesecloth. So cheesecloth is going to remove more particles than just the mesh will. So you would line the sieve with the cheesecloth. You would pour the liquid slowly over that. It's say if you were like straining stock or something of the like, and it would hold back all of the fine particles, and you could discard the cheesecloth later. Cheesecloth is very handy in the kitchen. I use it not just for lining my sieve. I also use it to drape butter and stuff over items. There's a skimmer. So a skimmer is a perforated spoon. It's going to remove solids from liquids and drain the liquids off. And then you also have a product called a spider, and a spider is typically used to, say, fish items that are floating in oil, like with a deep fryer is pretty common use. If I'm doing donuts, I would drop the donuts in and fish them out with the spider. The spider has larger holes than the skimmer does. A skimmer can also be used to like skim the foam and the funk off the top of the soup. A food mill is going to crush, grind, puree, and push your food products through a sieve there at the bottom. There are electronic products that kind of do this, and so these are less handy and used in the kitchens nowadays. And then you also may see a flour sifter. So a flour sifter essentially has mesh in the bottom. You put your dry ingredients in there. You turn the handle. The handle rolls through, and it pushes and blends and fluffs your items. In my kitchen, I don't actually utilize these very often. They can kind of be hard. They're harder to store. They only do the one thing. So I have a lot of the mesh sieves, and most of the time we just use those over a bowl to sift our ingredients. There's also kind of an outline here in your chapter 5 if you are scrolling down and looking at your book as well. When it comes to the processing equipment, which is also very commonly used, a slicer, which you've seen if you've ever been to a deli. This is not recommended for just a couple of items. It needs to be cleaned. You need to kind of put big items in there. You can adjust how thick or thin items are sliced up. There is also, as far as cutting tools go, the mandolin, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I do the knife skills and the cutting unit. But it will julienne slice and waffle cut items. There's also a food chopper or buffalo chopper. You can get them that attach to like your stand mixer, or you can get some that are tabletop models depending on how often or what you chop with. So this would be a buffalo chopper there. With sometimes they also grind meat, so they have meat grinder attachments. A food processor is the most versatile item that I use in the kitchen all the time. So you generally get a blade attachment, which can chop things, finely chop things. You can blend pastry, pie crust. You can cut fat into your dry ingredients when doing that. You also generally get slicing discs, so this will shred, it will slice, it will do lots of things. So of all the kitchen gadgets or kitchen tools, you can make dips, you can whip and puree, you can knead dough. It does a lot of things. And so a good food processor with a nice large bowl is definitely one of the first um, items that I recommend to everybody to have in a commission in a kitchen, either a home kitchen or a commercial kitchen. A blender also does a lot of those things, but it's not quite as handy, particularly for chopping food items, as the food processor is. But the blender is better if you're going to liquefy or crush ice or create a large liquid amount of things, because the food processor doesn't handle large amounts of liquid near as well as the blender does. An immersion blender is essentially, it's like a little blender on a stick. So you have a little blade that spins very, very fast, and you would actually immerse that down into the item that you want to puree. So in my classroom, in my kitchen, we use these a lot to make like a tomato soup or potato soup. We do our soups and purees very often, sauces, tomato sauce, and the like. And so this is very common. There's also a vertical mixer or stand mixer. You can have a floor model, you can have a countertop model. KitchenAids have been around for a long time. These come with various attachments. A floor model is probably going to have some more safety regiment things on there. A larger model will have a handle that will lift and raise the bowl. A smaller model, the head will come up and down. You have different attachments. The paddle attachment is your most common. That's going to essentially like mix, puree, grind, whip items together. The whip is when you want to actually really incorporate air. So if I'm making frosting or whipped cream or meringue, then I definitely utilize the whip. The dough hook, then my classroom call it the pirate hook. We always make the fun sound with it when we get it out. But this is for kneading dough only. And even if you're going to be doing dough that needs to be kneaded, I still knead some by hand, and I still use the paddle attachment to blend the ingredients together, and then I switch over to the dough hook, because the dough hook doesn't really blend things super well. It's useful, particularly if you're going to be doing a large batch, like in the floor mixer. But a lot of times we still do a lot of kneading by hand when we're doing yeast. And then you have a juicer. So a juicer is it's going to extract juice from fruits and raw fruits, vegetables, and herbs. And then it's also, sometimes you have some that get pulp out. So there's different varieties and types of juicers. And then you also may see a mortar and pedestal. So this is designed to muddle food items. This kind of crushes and releases the essence, particularly from herbs and things. These can be made of wood, marble, granite, volcanic stone, or hardwood or ceramic. So these are pretty common. And last but not least is a whipping siphon. So a whipping siphon, essentially you put heavy whipping cream into, you get it cold, and it uses a little nitrous cartridge, and it whips your whipping cream, and then that way you don't have to whip it by hand or by machine, and you can make whipped cream on the go, on the fly, whenever you have one of those available.